Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. This morning I was at coffee with my friends, and of course we were all knitting. And one of the ladies in our group was knitting on this block. It's going to be part of a larger Afghan that will be a gift. She figured she was almost done with the block, so she laid it out on the table, sort of like this, and when she did, it caught her eye that she had made a mistake here and had started her garter edging one stitch too soon. And there were 3 places in her knitting where she had completely forgot to include the garter edging and instead worked it in stockinette stitch. She's almost done with her block, but since this is a gift, she wanted it to be just perfect. So she was afraid she was going to have to rip out all the way back down to here to fix her problems. And I assured her that there's no need for that this could all be fixed without having to rip out almost the entire block. So she was kind enough to let me borrow her block so that I could demonstrate how to fix these mistakes in knitting. Let's get started. So first, we're going to ladder down a column of stitches to this one where the garter stitch was started a column earlier. I have already slipped the edging stitches onto one needle, and the other stitches are remaining on the needle my friend was knitting with. I like to identify the stitch that's wearing the wrong hat. And what I mean by that is that the top of the stitch is the wrong direction, I guess. So all of these stitches are wearing knit hats. This one right here is wearing a purl hat. So I'm going to just stick my crochet hook right through that stitch so that as I ladder down, my knitting can't unravel any further than that one stitch. And then I'm going to follow up the column and drop the stitch off the needle that is at the top of that column. And just gently pull out all of the stitches down that column. As I'm doing that, you can see why this is called laddering down, because as I pull out the stitches, it's making what looks like the rungs of a ladder. And finally, I get down to that last stitch that's held on my crochet hook. Since these are all knit stitches going back up this ladder, this is really a quick and easy fix. I just find the next rung of the ladder, and let me zoom in here so that it's a little bit easier to see. I find the next rung of the ladder, scoop it up with my crochet hook, and pull it from the back to the front through the stitch. Go up to the next rung, my crochet hook goes under that ladder rung, and pull it through from back to front. And I'm just going to continue that way all the way back up the ladder, where I go under a rung and pull it through the loop. And once I get up to the top of the rungs of the ladder, I'm just going to slip this stitch back onto a knitting needle. So now it's time to fix the edging, and we're going to use the exact same idea that I'm going to look all the way down here for the row of stitches that is wearing the wrong hats. So in this case, there's no purl bump where there should be. And I'm going to identify that row of stitches, and it's right across here. And I'm going to go across that row, and I'm going to put those stitches onto a spare DPN. So here's the first stitch that should be wearing a pearl hat, but it's not. So I'm going to put the right leg of that stitch onto my needle, and I'm going to work across this row. And I'll put the right leg of that stitch on my needle, go over a leg, pick up the next one, go over a leg, pick up the next one, and go over a leg, and then pick up that final one right here. So that all of these are held on my needle, and then when I do the scary part here and drop the stitches off of my other knitting needle, it can't unravel any further than right here. So now the scary part. I'm going to check and make sure I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches that are held safely on my spare needle, and I'm going to drop off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches at the edge. So I'll pull that needle out, and again, just gently unravel all the way down. This time you can see I get these loops at the edge of the knitting. I'm just going to have to watch as I'm unknitting stuff here when I'm reknitting, because it's not quite rungs like it was before, it's these loops. So I need to make sure that I'm working in the right ones as I'm picking back up. So I'll just go ahead and unravel down to my knitting needle. It looks a little bit scary here because I've got all these loose loops, but as long as I'm slow and steady, work on a nice flat surface, it won't be that hard to go back up this column. So it's nice to work on DPNs. It makes things a little bit easier to manipulate. My next row is going to be a purl row. I'm going to actually get this entire loop to the front, because when you're purling, your yarn is at the front. And I'm just going to purl across those 5 stitches. And again, maybe let me zoom in here to show you a little bit closer what I'm doing. So I have the next strand, and I'm just going to purl across those stitches. It's a little bit tricky here to manage your tension, but again, slow and steady. I'll identify the next loop that I'm going to be using the yarn to work. I'm going to just lift the others out of the way. And since this was a purl row, the next row will be a knit row. I'll be using the bottom part of the loop to knit across the stitches. I still have the second half of that loop to work. So the next row is going to be a purl row, since I just did a knit row. I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and then purl across. And you can see why it's easiest if you're working on double pointed needles, because then as you're switching rows, you can just slide those stitches from one end of the needle to the other without having to turn things over, because that would be a little bit trickier here with all these loose ends dangling out. This last little one can be a little bit tricky to pull through. So again, I'll identify my next loop, slide my stitches down, start with the lowest rung, and knit across those stitches. Slide my stitches down to the other end of the needle, and then this time I'm going to purl across the stitches, and maybe I should have pulled that loop to the front before I slid the stitches down, and then purl across the stitches. I'll just continue all the way up the edging. I'm back up to this very top loop to get things fixed. So I will use it to knit across a row and then purl back. And all told, fixing both laddering down that column and fixing these edging stitches, it's taken me probably about a half an hour. And that includes taking the time to set up my camera and actually film each segment of this tutorial. That slows me down a little bit because as I'm demonstrating, I'm not knitting as fast as maybe I would if I was just concentrating on my knitting and not knitting and filming. So a half an hour isn't too bad, really. It definitely would have taken my friend longer to rip out her work all the way back down all of those rows and re-knit all of her knitting. Now that I'm back up here at the top, I can find where the yarn is, slip those last 2 stitches over, and then I can finish knitting this row that my friend started. Then she will be ready to finish off her block. So here's my friend's block. Now that all of the pattern errors were fixed here up the side, you can see there's a little bit of tension irregularity on the edge where the corrections were made, but I'm fairly confident that this will all work out in the wash. And if not in the wash, it will definitely work out when this block is joined to the block next to it for the afghan. So I hope you've enjoyed this little impromptu demonstration of how to correct mistakes in your knitting. A lot of times, even though it takes a little bit of time to fix those mistakes, it's a whole lot better than ripping out rows and rows of stitches. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!